Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues and friends around the world. I am Valerie Gordon, and I'm the president of the Caribbean Evaluators International, which is hosting this event along with our partners. Excuse me. For those of you who don't know, the CEI is a premier organization for professional evaluators in the Caribbean, and we are proud to be celebrating our 12th year of advancing evaluation practice across the region. It is also our 6th year of observing GEI's Global Evaluation Week, which is in its 7th year. So we only missed 2020, which I think is a pretty good record. The overall theme for this year is evaluation, evidence, and trust in the age of AI. We're very pleased to have you with us, particularly because some 330 events are happening all across the world this week. And so it's really special that you could join us today. Today's session is entitled AI and Evaluation in Complex Contexts, Climate Resilience, Disaster Response, and Humanitarian Action. I will just move on to introducing our partners. ALNAP is our partner for this session. ALNAP is an active learning network for accountability and performance, and they'll be managing this entire session. Our collaboration with ALNAP began in late 2025 when we collaborated on a training webinar for evaluation in the context of humanitarian action. We're delighted to be expanding that relationship and look forward to a long and productive relationship in going forward. Our other partner is the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, SALISIS, which has partnered with us for the 6 years that we have undertaken our global journey. And through its master's program in development studies, it continues to play a key role in developing evaluation capacity in the region, with monitoring and evaluation being a mandatory component of that program. Last but not least is the Caribbean Development Bank, with whom the CEI recently partnered on the highly successful Youth in Evaluation Forum 2026, and who will be hosting the final of our global offerings tomorrow, June the 5th, which is entitled Artificial Intelligence and Evidence Use in Caribbean Development Policy. I will now ask Dr. Nadine Persard, our Director of Professional Development and Training, to introduce our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you,
Go ahead, Nadine.
Valerie. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's session, May Albiento. May is a research officer within ALNAP's research pool, a team of researchers working flexibly and dynamically across a wide range of work. Researchers within this research pool support the delivery of high quality and innovative research. May has more than a decade of experience in the humanitarian and developmental sector in the Philippines. Prior to joining ALNAP in 2022, she worked as an evaluation and research consultant for local and international NGOs focusing on child protection, gender and women empowerment, livelihoods, and disaster response and management. Her academic background is in evaluation, public policy and management, development studies, and psychologies. It is my distinct pleasure to hand you over to our moderator for today, May. Welcome, May.
Thank you, Valerie and Nadine. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, wherever you're logging in from at this moment, and welcome to our session. As Nadine mentioned, my name is May Albiento. I'm a research officer at ALNAP, the Global Network for Advancing Humanitarian Learning, and I'm pleased to be joining you all today. Just a couple of reminders before we continue. Please say hello in the chat if you haven't. So please tell us your name, your role and organization, and where you're logging in from, so we know who are here with us today. And we also request that you keep your microphones and video disabled while the presentation is ongoing, to save on bandwidth. And please feel free to turn them on later in the Q&A. And if you have any questions, comments, or insights, kindly put them in the chat, and we'll have time to respond to them towards the end of the session. Please also note that the session is being recorded, and this will be shared later on CEI's YouTube and social media channels. Okay, so we have an exciting session today. We will start with presentations from our esteemed panel of speakers. And then we'll have 2 rounds of discussion with them before we go into our Q&A and closing. Now, before anything else, let's do a quick poll first. Homam, if you can launch our poll question. There you go. What is the most useful or the best AI tool for your evaluation work? What has been the most useful AI tool? If you could answer maybe just one. Let's see what people are finding useful. I see a lot of responses of Claude, followed by ChatGPT. If you can't answer on the Zoom poll, you can also put your responses in the chat so we could take a look at them as well. Okay, a few more seconds to let the others respond. Okay. I see 4 people are not using AI. That's pretty cool. So Claude is still leading with 44%. Yeah, what's the most useful if you have an account with Claude? Okay, a few more seconds for others to respond. Okay, let's see the result. Come on. Okay, so for most people, it's Claude that I find most useful, followed by ChatGPT. Others are using Copilot, and some 16 people, 4 people are not using any AI or not seeing any AI tool as useful. That's interesting, actually. Thanks, Mom. Okay. On to our discussion. We know that AI is everywhere now, whether we like it or not. AI is fundamentally shifting the way we live, we learn, and work, including in evaluations. And we've seen how AI tools are offering the potential to analyze vast and complex data sets and identify patterns that may otherwise go unnoticed. They also promise to help us process information at scale and speed that was previously unimaginable. But alongside these opportunities come important questions, including for us as evaluators to think about. In a recent survey we conducted among our community of practice members at ALNAP, AI and M&E in humanitarian context was identified as one of the top topics they're very interested in. And we are starting to look into this topic as well and have published a number of commentaries on this, which my colleague Sarah will share in the chat if you're interested to read them as well. And we're very, very happy to be partnering with CEI to host this very timely discussion at the Global Evaluation Week. In today's discussion, we will try to explore how AI tools can contribute to evaluating climate resilience and humanitarian action. And we hope this conversation will challenge us to think about how it can be harnessed in ways that strengthen evidence, support learning, and contribute to more effective and equitable climate and humanitarian response. With that, I am very delighted to introduce our panelists who bring with them a range of perspectives, experience, and expertise on this rapidly evolving topic. So we have Ms. Kathy Richards from Open Environmental Data Project, Dr. Tino Kreutzer from COBO, and Dr. Terence Jansi from the Contera Group. Unfortunately, our fourth speaker, Dr. Valerie Grant, won't be able to join us today because of unforeseeable circumstances. Okay, so now let's begin by hearing the work of our esteemed panel of speakers, what they're doing on the intersection of evaluation and AI. So let me introduce to you our first speaker for this session. It's Dr. Tino Kreutzer. Tino is the Chief Operating and Innovation Officer at COBO, the nonprofit behind COBO Toolbox. I'm sure you're all familiar with COBO Toolbox. He leads COBO's work on responsible AI for humanitarian data, including the speech-to-text pipelines for low-resource languages, and has published on the ethical implications of processing personal data with AI in crisis contexts. He has over 15 years of field experience across Africa and Asia in crisis response and humanitarian action, specializing in bridging high-level AI technology with the practical realities of fieldwork and evaluation. Over to you, Tino.
Thank you, May, and thank you for having us. Good to see everyone. Thanks for joining this panel. I'll also introduce quickly Josh Beretta from our team, who is also one of the key members of our AI efforts, who will also be able to respond to questions while I talk. So before we get started, and I introduce a little bit about COBO and what we do in this domain, could I just get, again, some more participation in the chat, if you don't mind? If you've used COBO before for your own work, evaluation, monitoring, survey work, if you don't mind dropping just one line of where you used it and how you used it in the past, that will help us get a full picture and yeah, make sure that our examples, both in this presentation and later on, are, I suppose, grounded in some of your own lived experiences. Thank you. Great. So I would say the first thing, and let me know if the slides did come through. If not, I don't need slides. We can absolutely just do this with a regular introduction.
It's on screen, so you can use it. You don't see it? We see it. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't for some reason. But if everyone else sees it, that's... Oh, I see it. There's a, yeah, split screen doesn't show up because of the pinned screen. There you go. So yeah, wonderful. So I guess what we see here is a bit of the evolution. I'll talk back of where COBO came from and how we got here. So as you can see on the screen, COBO actually started about 20 years ago as a project to support researchers in Iraq, in northern Uganda, in Central African Republic. And the main challenge we had back in those days was how to collect better evidence, how to collect data to inform programs in a timely way. You know, clipboards, papers, all proven technology for many decades, but of course they could take weeks and months to transcribe and analyze. And in the kinds of environments where we work in for humanitarian response, for post-disaster research, for fragile context and development, we don't have that kind of time. We don't have the kinds of resources oftentimes to be doing this. And so COBO was created by field researchers, by field practitioners to be able to analyze and collect those kinds of data, first in Iraq, then in northern Uganda, where the name COBO came about from our local research team. And so over time, many organizations, both in the humanitarian development space and over time, other sectors such as environmental protection, conservation, human rights, and research, all of those sectors have started to adopt COBO more and more. And you can see here on the graph that this reflects the amount of data being collected. We started hosting our COBO Toolbox platform just over 10 years ago as a free resource for any nonprofit, any research organization in the world. So COBO remains fully and fully accessible to any organization up to a very high limit. And that allows organizations all around the world, about 35,000 so far, to collect data on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to sustain their programs. As you can see from the comments here, many use cases. I would say, obviously, from the point of view of this event today, evaluation is one of the most central ones. It is the method for allowing data to influence whether a program should continue, should be replicated, should be scaled, or should perhaps be stopped, right? So data is one of the most crucial ways of doing that. And the way that Kobo has been able to do that is making it not only free, but also making it accessible for many organizations who have not previously done that, who don't have the expertise, by making it user-friendly, multilingual, and being able to collect data not only offline, but also in many different ways, from structured questions, but also more and more open-ended, unstructured information, GPS locations, lots of advanced use cases that we won't go into right now. If you could skip to the next slide there, May. What we've built as an example, perhaps on the more AI-related front over the last few years, is the ability now to, for example, conduct interviews that are both structured and unstructured. So mixed method surveys or evaluation forums where you can conduct, include audio questions. So the ability to listen, simply listen to what the person in front of you has to say, record the audio as a way of recording really complex information, details that would not easily fit or that cannot fit into a single choice or multiple choice checkbox. This kind of information, we really wanted to make sure that it can be more easily collected, not just through notepads. Again, the problem that we faced 20 years ago is who's going to read and transcribe all of these handwritten notes, if they're even legible. But using technology sensibly and responsibly for transcribing the audio through speech recognition, translating it, if necessary, to another language through machine translation, and then analyzing it through large language models, which is what we call the latest AI tools, to be able to then synthesize, analyze, and summarize that kind of information. We've done this now for 5 years. Long before ChatGPT came about, we started integrating these AI tools. We still called it natural language processing in those early days. And we wanted to make sure that it's reliable. We wanted to make sure it's ethically sound, so we don't roll out something that might actually put respondents at risk or organizations in harm's way. We also want to make sure it's reliable. So we've done a lot of testing. We've actually just finished an evaluation of 46 different large language models so that we can pick the most reliable, most also ethical models so that it can process the information only on Kobo server in an open source, open weights model in a way that does not convey information and does not ever share information with external third-party vendors. So that's just a quick vignette, if you will, of what we've built on the AI front. There's other tools we're building in as well. But again, we have a hopeful but a cautious approach to AI that does not leap and jump on the opportunities that present themselves. We first want to understand all the potential ways that it can go wrong, the ways that we can counter those risks, and then carefully, slowly roll them out in the most responsible way. I'll stop here, but thank you so much.
Thanks, Tino, for that. Haven't used the AI for qualitative analysis yet in Kobo Toolbox, but yeah, I'm gonna probably try that one next time we do an evaluation in the Philippines. Okay, thanks again. Our next speaker, I'd like to call on Miss Kathy Richards. Kathy is a technologist who helps activists, organizations, and other social change agents make the most of data and technology in order to increase their impact. She is currently the data and technology lead at Open Environmental Data Project, but she previously worked at the Engine Room, taught metrics and data visualization at the School of Visual Arts, co-founded Pueblo Collab, a collaborative that creates tech and data processes for the social sector, and worked at GitLab and Keystone Accountability. Kathy is also co-lead of the Climate Learning Group within WorldTech Initiative's AI Community of Practice. The floor is yours, Kathy.
So much, May, and happy to see everyone that I can see or everyone that I can hear today. But as May mentioned, my name is Kathy Richards, and I'm the data and tech lead at Open Environmental Data Project, which leverages the spirit of collaboration to create multi-sector strategies that strengthen the role of data in environmental and climate governance. What does that look like in practice? We regularly make guides and toolkits for communities to be able to kind of leverage the resources that they have, collect their own data, sometimes create their own sensors so that they can advocate for themselves. And in the before times, when the US government was a little bit different, we also worked with the federal government to kind of champion for liaisons and just things that really would help the communities be able to work with the government. So really, yeah, quite a few changes. But as May mentioned, I'm also the co-lead of the Climate and AI Working Group at the Merle Tech Community of Practice. All links that you'll be able to find at the QR code, but I will also drop the link at the end in the chat so you can easily access it. But essentially, in my work, we've approached AI from a point of view that centers community above all. So this can look in many ways. But we're trying to envision a future where AI in climate context addresses specific geographic and cultural concerns while mitigating the impacts that this technology can have on the environment. So for example, at Open Environmental Data Project, we think a lot about governance and creating reproducible systems via open tools and data. In terms of AI, we're currently working on a brief on participation first AI. And what we're determining participation first AI is an attempt to create governance conditions that preserve human interpretive authority, collective meaning making, and community autonomy before those capacities are flattened into AI infrastructure. In particular, our approach will cover things like encouraging ongoing involvement, valuing unique perspectives, avoiding techno-solutionism, and choosing a right-size approach. On this last point, we've leaned into researching and experimenting with AI at different scales. We feel that AI without place-based knowledge is incomplete, and big tech dominant models flatten what's unique and local. So this can look in many ways, including making use of RAGs or retrieval augmented systems. But in particular, we have been looking into local or small models where possible. This approach is particularly useful in contexts where internet connectivity is non-existent or limited, or there is a need to use smaller edge devices such as cell phones or remote sensors, which I will say, I was happy to see Tino share that they've been using open source models, because that's really the approach that we've been going for. The benefits for small and local models include things like allowing users to move away from centralized, resource-intensive big tech systems that are ultimately susceptible to failure. Additionally, the rising cost of these tools, as well as the lack of interoperability for many of them, create a type of vendor lock-in, making infrastructure less resilient. Also, small AI can function, what we call small AI, can function using minimal resources, as I mentioned before, operating in areas with little to no internet and on edge devices that only need batteries. By prioritizing low complexity models and smaller data sets that focus on specific local needs, we not only reduce the energy footprint, but also mitigate biases often introduced in massive scrape data sets and bring the technology to remote places. Given that most of these smaller models are also open source, as Tina mentioned, or open weight, really, they allow for more transparency as well, allowing users to see the weights and sometimes the full technology and all the decisions that went into making it. So that's really like a thing that we really approve of, we really enjoy, and we find to be a better alternative than the big tech models. Additionally, small AI also reduces the need for massive data sets in favor of smaller, more culturally relevant data sets. Local communities can train these models on their own small data sets, creating an AI model that better fits their specific context, which we feel is really important. In short, small AI, or what we're calling small AI, allows us to be more intentional about how we apply this technology, which is really important for us. Instead of using a big tech model that flattens the whole typically Western world into one model that tries to interpret everything, we can make a model that's just the right size for the challenge at hand. Alongside with the participation first brief, we plan to develop a small AI working series, which will look at what this approach looks like in practice. What are the models and devices available? How to get started, in short, an introduction to the technology. We'll also look at how to approach maintenance and governance of this technology because, as we know, sometimes there's more funding for pilots than for maintenance of the technologies. Plus, in general, maintenance is really difficult. Lastly, we'll look at the design and evaluation of the models so you can iterate and have the model grow with you. That's really important for us, just kind of really getting from this conceptual framework of what small, local, contextually relevant AI is to something that people can, grab some documentation, as we like to do at Open Environmental Data Project, and implement it themselves. We also just wrapped up a blog series, which you'll also find on that link, called Field Notes on AI, where we pondered over topics like when does AI help and when does it increase risk, what it means to have a point of view, also from the point of view of AI, and the kinds of patterns that humans can create that machines cannot. And lastly, how can we use AI to clarify questions or to prototype? So you'll see that quite often, not quite often, but essentially we understand that AI is here and many people are being, not necessarily forced to use it, but pushed to use it. We might feel like we're missing out on opportunities, but we're also trying to say, hey, this is a healthier way to do this, more relevant, potentially will help you more because it's tailor-made for you. And it's a lot more transparent and things like that. But lastly, as part of the MTI AI community practice, we'll be hosting a second session of our small AI workshop with an additional module that intends to be more advanced than the previous iteration that we held last year. This round, we hope to have more opportunities for participants to tailor their own models, train it, etc., and develop reusable scripts. So you can find links to all these resources at the QR code, but also happy to connect and chat. But yeah, as I mentioned, trying to take the path of imagining a different future with AI that's a little bit nicer to our environment and also more helpful for us. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Kathy. I learned two things today: AI in place-based knowledge and these local and small models of AI. It's very interesting, and I'm sure those who are working at the community and more local levels would find these useful as well. So feel free to connect with Kathy if you're interested in those things as well. And finally, we have our third speaker, Dr. Terence Jancy. Terence is a senior evaluation consultant with experiences as a practitioner, scholar, and consultant in monitoring and evaluation, programming, and project design and administration for humanitarian and development programs throughout Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Currently, he is an associate professor of practice in the Peace Building and Development Program at Eastern Mennonite University and is a senior evaluation specialist for the Contera Group. Over to you, Terence.
Thank you. I found Kathy's and Tino's presentations really interesting. I hadn't really thought of the sort of the local application work, and I resonated a lot with Tino's presentation because we've used Kobo over the years. I do have a visualization, I think it's on the next slide, which was actually AI generated because I do many things well, but I'm terrible at visualizations. And so I asked, I think, Claude to build me one. So I guess that could be an example of a use of AI in the evaluation field. So I started working in the humanitarian world in the 1980s, and I was kind of reflecting as I was hearing the other speakers, just sort of the trends and evolutions in technology and productivity, and some of the debates. So when I first started in the 80s, computers weren't even really used that much in development work. So there was a big debate. I remember one of my project office, my first, there was the big debate in the office was whether we should get an electric typewriter, let alone a computer. So then the computers came on the scene, and there was all the debates and conversations about how does this affect development and humanitarian programming, who gets excluded, who has access, and then later on the internet came along, and we're all very familiar with what happened there. And now we're in the AI conversation. So I was just kind of reflecting on some of these transitions over time. And one of the things that I was reflecting on is that when these new technologies come on, actually my son gave this excellent example the other day. We try it out in different things, like what can this be useful for? So he said, like, imagine we invent the spoon, right? And say, so, oh, this is really great for scooping up soup. What else can it do? And so then we try it on a lot of different things. So we try it on, like, well, we can use it as a mini catapult to flick food across the table. We probably shouldn't do that. We can use it to dig holes. It's not very efficient for that. We can try to cut down a tree with a spoon, but it doesn't really work. And I like this metaphor because it's kind of where I feel we are with the AI sort of question right now. It's like it's a tool that's come on the scene, and we're experimenting with it in a lot of different ways. Like, what is it actually useful for? And so we're trying it out in different places. And that's kind of where we are in the evaluation sphere right now in my work. My current iteration is doing a lot of evaluations, mostly for UN agencies with the Cantera group. And there's different places in the evaluation cycle. And we've been trying out the AI in all of these different places and kind of seeing like which places add value, which don't. And there was probably a couple sort of learning principles, I guess I would say, coming out of sort of our experimentation. And this visualization is actually based on the work of one of my colleagues in Cantera, Jane Burke, who does a lot of the heavy lifting and behind the scenes work on AI in our organization. I use the AI, but she programs the AI, as it were. And one of the principles is this idea of the human AI hybrid workflow. So it's not, do we give this to AI and have it generated, but there's this sort of secular or iterative process where the human has to sort of work with, program the AI, review the results, add more input in for the learning, re-review the results, and then sort of guide it to conclusion. So I think this is a helpful sort of idea that we're using this as a tool, but it's part of a hybrid process. It's not only AI or human generated, at least as far as we've gotten into the scene. I would say that Tino pointed this out. One of the sort of 2 or 3 criteria for when we can use AI most efficiently in our experimenting with the evaluation process. So there's a couple sort of choke points where we get large amounts of data. One is usually with these UN agencies, they give us thousands of documents to review. So the document review at the beginning of the evaluation phase, there's an enormous amount of information that's available, and it's very challenging to go through, synthesize, organize, extract insights from that information in the time available for an evaluation. Like if you're doing research, you can spend years doing this, but you only have a couple weeks when you're doing evaluations. The other choke point for information is with the qualitative interviews, and I was really interested to hear Tino mention that Kobo's adding this feature for the semi-structured, because that tends to be the default interview approach in evaluations is a semi-structured interview, 1 hour to 1.5 hours with many stakeholders, up to 300 stakeholders in a big evaluation. So we generate enormous amounts of qualitative information from these interviews. And so this is the other choke point, is how to manage, assess, analyze this in a systematic manner. So we found AI to be kind of useful at those 2 places. So in our, it would be number 1 and number 3 on my little visualization, where we have these choke points of really big sort of data that we're trying to manage. The other place where we found useful in the AI is in the mundane or repetitive tasks. So for example, interview guide development. This is once you have the evaluation questions, once you've structured the context, then you have to build interview guides, semi-structured interview guides. Sometimes the agencies require a different guide for each type of stakeholder. this is fairly repetitive. It's like evaluation 101, how to build a good questionnaire. And it's the kind of thing that you can, that AI can generate very quickly because it's a repetitive and mundane sort of task. You have the stakeholder do it this way. You can just do a quick review, make sure the questions are correct, but the parameters for how you develop a good question are quite standard and basic. So it's not so. And then the other place where that's sort of a mundane or repetitive task is in sort of the quality assurance, not the report writing, but sort of quality assuring the report. So I found there was a suggestion that came up on somebody's weblog. I can't remember which right now the source, but they said they found it useful to put their report after it's written into the AI and say, review this report as if I was someone who was not an expert in this field. What things are confusing? What things need to be clarified more? So that kind of, so 2 and 4 are kind of on this visualization I have here are kind of examples of the mundane and repetitive. And 1 and 3 are the examples of sort of the really massive amounts, the choke points in terms of information overload. Now, I'm going to come back to this in some of the panel discussion, but then I was saying, like, so why do we use AI? And there's 2 kinds of sort of desires or purpose. One is the speed, right? So if you're in a humanitarian context or you're doing humanitarian evaluation, often you want the information really quickly because you have to make a decision very, very fast. And so the AI process can speed up the analysis that you could do, but it would just take you a lot longer. The other potential use is to generate new insights from the data. So like seeing something that you wouldn't have seen in that big mass of documents. So you would use the AI, if you're wanting to speed up things or if you're wanting to generate new insights. I have some thoughts on that, but I'll wrap up with one sort of observation, is that when the computer came along, there was this question of, this is not saving me time. I feel busier than ever. And somebody pointed out at that time, the computer wasn't intended to save you time. It was intended to increase your productivity. And I suspect what we'll end up with AI is something where it won't actually save us time. We'll just have higher expectations for what we're needed to produce. Eventually, this is down the road. We have a few years of conversations on it yet. Okay, hopefully I didn't go over my 7-minute mark, but I apologize if I did, May. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Terence. Yeah, very, very interesting discussion on that purpose of AI. We can delve into that a bit later. Thanks so much to the 3 speakers for sharing your work and insights on the use of AI in evidence generation and in evaluations. Now, I'd like to request all 3 to open your videos as we are about to go into our first round of discussion to learn more about your exciting work. And I'm going to start with Kathy. Kathy, you train and support organizations in using data and tech. What do you think evaluators most commonly misunderstand about these AI tools, and what would you want them to know and take away from this session?
Yeah, thanks so much, May. So I actually read a quote quite recently from Instagram, admittedly not exactly the best source, but I did go and check to make sure it wasn't misinformation. But it was from Hans Zimmer, musician, makes quite a lot of music for movies and things like that. And he said something like, AI is a snapshot of the past being sold as a future. And I thought that was, it was tremendous. Definitely sat with it for quite some time. And I will, to make it clear, don't want it to come off as, no one should ever use AI. It's completely useless. But also keeping in mind that that's essentially what it is. It's data, information, works, books, everything that we've created in the past, being turned into a model for us to continue using. But I think, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's important to understand the limitations of it, to recognize the limitations of it, that it's just kind of recycling the things that we've created. So we're able to create text today because in the past, the greats took the time to create these unique strings of text that other people then started using and things like that. And so I thought that quote was important because I regularly remind myself that these models are sometimes further behind than I am when it comes to understanding the slang that my nieces and nephews use. I'm just trying to stay up to date. sometimes a Google search is even better. So with that to say, I think it's important for us to know that it's great at helping us surface patterns that we already know about, but not so much patterns that are kind of new to us. And the world is changing, AI is changing everything around us. And so it's important for us to like use it where it's relevant. Kind of, an analogy that I use quite often is, you wouldn't use a hammer for every single thing that you do. To put in a screw into a piece of wood, you would use a screwdriver. So it's understanding the limitations of the tool, understanding that it's going to be great at doing things that we've already done, but less so at surfacing things that it doesn't know anything about. There was I feel like it's linked somewhere, but if not, I'll definitely drop it in the chat. There was a recent study where it actually described some of the things that AI doesn't know about as unthinkable, especially like in the global south, et cetera, because it can't imagine it because it doesn't know anything about it. It can't even think about it because we never taught it that, right? And so all that to say, I think one of the key things is understanding that we still have new knowledge to create, and we still have new things that we need to surface. And AI is quite good at helping us surface some of those things, but we still have to take those extra steps to make sure it's not flattening things that it doesn't know about, going back to the paper, that it's thinking about the things, or that, if it's not thinking about those things, that we are coming in to help it think about those things that it can't even imagine, because it's limited to the world that it was taught. So I think that's one of the big ones. I'll try to find a link to that paper as well.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, it's really important to understand the limitations of AI. And I guess that speaks to the question as well of like, how far do we allow AI to do the work that we do? Do we use it for everything, or do we explore other ways of doing things as well, aside from AI? Now I'd like to go back to Terence. You mentioned briefly earlier about, the two purposes of AI is that it's about increasing the speed and generating new insights from data. But when using AI in humanitarian evaluations, what do you think is the biggest contribution or value? Is it doing things faster, or in enabling evaluators to learn the things they could not have learned otherwise?
Yeah. Well, I could talk about this for hours, but I won't, because we don't have that much time. But I really like I just want to mention, like Kathy's observation about it doesn't know. I was thinking about this, the AI doesn't know the things that it's not exposed to, like, so the global south, and I'm connecting it back to a lot of your work, Kathy, that you're doing in the community. And I thought that was really is interesting because we have the same challenge with like development professionals who might come out of the global north, but not really understand the global south, not just related to development professionals. We could probably say anybody. And like they don't know what they don't know, and that creates a lot of the headaches that I've complained about over the last 40 years. But so I was just making that connection that AI is kind of in that same phase as if it was a person from the global north or a techno. So back to my speed and insights question. I was asking around actually because once I put this out in the sort of world, I got a lot of people coming back to me. I was saying like, hey, so when you use AI for your analysis, did it tell you anything new that surprised you? And I got a lot of pushback that not really. Like the benefit that most people said is that it can do it faster, but it didn't do, and it can do it more systematically. So you can say that we did analyze all 1,000 documents that WFP gave us, but it didn't give us anything surprising. So I got a lot of people who are saying that, and even more so, people raise the point that sometimes if it's a new insight, you have to make sure it's not hallucinating. And so there's quite a few examples we've had of where it's like, oh, that seems new. And then I look back farther and it's like, oh, this wasn't actually in the data. This kind of made it up. So there's still some issue. It hasn't been happening quite as much. Like even in the last year, I think the hallucinations have gone down a little bit. But it does seem like the primary usefulness so far that we found for AI in evaluations is just increasing the speed that you can get this information, the evidence package much faster, which can help decision makers, have more timely decisions, which is a big challenge in evaluations because these often happen, a year later, the evaluation report comes out. And by then, the country office doesn't care anymore because they've moved on to something else. So speeding up the evaluation process, I think, has been the most useful thing we've found so far, rather than like new insights. Sorry, that was more than 3 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So increasing the speed, but yeah, but always, I guess, being wary of those hallucinations and double checking the data that what it's saying is really in the data and not like a new thing out of the blue. Thanks, Terrence. Tino, I'm curious to know how Kobo has been co-designing AI models for low resource African languages. And what has that taught you about what developers get wrong when they work without the community input?
That's a good question. In fact, I'll share a bit more about what we're doing for speech recognition. So I mentioned earlier that we are already, there's an ability within Kobo to record audio, transcribe the interaction, and then do analysis of the transcript. But the big gap that obviously everyone ever worked internationally knows that many languages may not be very good or may not be available at all through commercial speech recognition models. So to the point Kathy made is that there's a potential boon using these commercial models. They're cheap, they're fast, but they don't care about which languages we actually need for our evaluation. So for example, with Google, which we use for our transcription, we have about 150 languages for transcription. The world speaks about 7,000 languages. And that includes many, many languages, not only in Africa, but all around the world, that have millions of speakers that simply do not have a transcription option. So what we're doing now is actually creating our own speech recognition models. The technology for all that is there. And as Kathy mentioned, it's the open source, open weights models that we can actually train on new training data for new languages. So we're doing that at the moment for Rohingya, which is a language spoken for many refugees coming out of Myanmar. We're now in Bangladesh, and also for Kurdish, especially for Iraq. And we can continue scaling this as long as we got funding for any other languages, including many, many languages in Africa, which is one of the places in the world with least coverage for commercial transcription. And so to your question, if we don't think about it, if we don't worry about it, then we are going to have an amazing technology for transcribing French, English, Spanish, Portuguese interactions in survey evaluation, and many other languages. If you think about Haitian Creole, for example, that would not be able to benefit. So we do need to invest in that. And we don't know about gaps like this, and there are many other gaps for these models, unless we work with the local communities, unless we listen to their own concerns, their own testing results, and then plan accordingly. And sometimes planning accordingly means, yes, we need to invest in creating our own models, and that's what we do. And yeah, anyone interested in learning more or perhaps collaborating on that, or if there's specific use cases or languages that you're particularly worried about that commercial tools do not cover at all or do not cover well, please get in touch. We'd love to work with you.
Wow, I think that's a super important thing to consider because it helps ensure that the local voices are captured in all our evaluation processes as well. So thank you so much to our three speakers. That's our round one of our panel discussion. So in our next round of discussion, I will be asking our speakers to share their insights on two very interesting issues raised around AI. Should we go to the... Okay, so this is the first statement. Our audience can also put in their comments or insights in the chat related to this statement. So the statement says, while AI has the potential to strengthen humanitarian decision-making, its energy and resource demands may inadvertently contribute to climate crisis, potentially worsening the very humanitarian needs it seeks to address. Who wants to go first? Terrence, would you like to go first? We have 2 minutes to respond.
2 minutes.
Very controversial statement.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it will contribute it's a very interesting statement. I'm interested in what Kathy and Tino think about this. My first thought was being alive contributes to the global climate crisis. So almost anything will contribute negatively to more. But I was thinking like it would be interesting. Right now, we don't have any restrictions on whether AI should be using, it sucks up a lot of power. Does that power come from renewables, solar, wind, hydro, or is it coming from petroleum? Right now, there's no restrictions on that, and I was thinking this could be an interesting direction to consider. Is if AI is going to be here to stay, can we at least have it here to stay with a renewable sort of sourcing? Um, but yeah, but I think it's unlikely, even if we stopped using it in humanitarian evaluations, it's still going to be growing. So it's more of, can we mitigate that in some way by renewables or something? That was hopefully less than 2 minutes. So go ahead, May.
Thanks, Terry. Kathy, any thoughts on this statement?
Yeah, I somewhat agree with Terrence. 20, I think we all know that I think the biggest thing is that just the way that AI is growing is just not sustainable. We see it not just with the energy things, but also the data centers and how they're coming into communities. And people are having all sorts of health issues and environmental justice issues. So also being very mindful of that. But also now very aware that there's potentially nothing I can say to make it stop. Or to not even make it stop, but even just to make people be more mindful of how to use it. But I think at least my take is with all things in life, moderation is key. Kind of spoke about this earlier, but it's really being intentional about how we use AI. Do we really need it for mapping, not mapping in that sense, but to get from point A to point B? Like, I don't need AI in Google Maps. I don't need AI in every single tool that I use. There's specific moments where it's really useful and moments where it's not, where a simple search can do the job. And I think, we just have to be really intentional about how we use it, understanding that quite often, especially potentially, at least me living in New York, I don't live near any data centers. I don't think they would be able to afford any data centers or, anything related to AI. To be built in New York, and very mindful of that. So also kind of every time I use it, I try to think of the other communities that could be affected. And I think earlier I had shared a link, but I will also share one a little bit later. Just going kind of back to right sizing things for the situation. Development Seed is a great organization, super knowledgeable about spatial data and just processes and stuff. And they actually created a geocoder, which if anyone has ever had to geocode data, which is essentially kind of turning addresses or other things like that into something that the computer can understand, into a really tiny model that anyone could use essentially for free at no cost, offline, etc. So there's definitely opportunities to be better and have less of an impact in everything we do, not just use of AI. And we have more choices now too. I'm sorry, go ahead, May. All done.
Thanks, Kathy. Tino, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll come in from a different angle because I think the direct environmental impacts are relatively well known, to Terrence's point. I think using renewables and not destroying the air of communities living next to a data center are pretty obvious goals that I think we're failing on right now. And if communities succeed at that, they will just push the problem out to poorer and poorer communities. But I would actually like to come at it from a different angle. If this is the glass half full, half empty question, I think the biggest risk that we are not engaging with, and we need to be much more honest about, is it's sort of a cascading crisis that we don't quite see yet in the social stratum, which is people obviously have a lot of opportunities to write better emails and summarize long reports. The advantages are obvious. People use them every day, but the long-term costs are only becoming evident now, which is people do not practice their critical thinking, and therefore it's a skill that we have learned and we can lose. We know that. We've seen that. There's research on this point. When it comes to climate crisis, that is a really dangerous problem because so much of the world does not yet understand, and certainly many policymakers in certain countries do not understand the complexity of climate change. And science is complicated, even for people who think of themselves as scientists, who are not climate scientists. It's hard to understand this. And I think once we lose critical thinking, once we rely on everything being just spoon-fed and summarized for us, once we use AI to generate garbage on social media, which is increasingly happening, the amount of quality information that humans consume and actually consume in a way of understanding it, learning new complexities, I think that's a really challenging problem. We need to educate people more about these challenges, and we need people to be engaging more with these issues. And that means learning new complex information. And right now we're sort of seeing a drift in the opposite direction of lowering our cognitive abilities because it's just so much work. And why not just take a couple of ChatGPT summaries every now and then, and it should be okay, should be good enough. But to Terrence's excellent point earlier, or was it Kathy? I'm not sure. Someone made this very, very good point, is that this is technology trained on the past. And when it comes to climate change, we're constantly evolving our knowledge and our practices. And therefore, the summaries that these tools can give us by necessity will reflect our past thinking, not our future thinking that has to evolve. So I think I see that as a major risk that I clearly struggle to express that in less than 2 minutes, but it's clearly a problem that I think has a lot of potential to make our fight against climate change harder, not easier.
Yeah, it's very difficult, I guess, to to address the challenge. And going back to Kathy's point about like moderation and intentionality, I think those are the key things that we need to think. And yeah, before we use AI, let's just think where it makes sense to use it and not use it just because it's available, it's there. Okay. If you have any thoughts or questions, please do share them in the comment box as well, in the chat box. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue. We have another interesting question, and this is around inclusion of voices in AI tools. So how will the inclination towards using AI tools in evaluations of humanitarian action affect the inclusion of voices and lived experiences of affected communities? Can I start with you, Kathy, on this?
Yeah, totally. Thanks so much,
Your
Mai.
thoughts on this?
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
I mean, I feel like, yeah, I've mentioned a few things already. But to the point of Tina, where it's like glass half empty, glass half full, I won't lie, there are definitely moments where I'm like, this glass is completely empty. But I do try to push for yeah, just speaking enough about the alternatives in the hopes that hopefully someone will say this is doable. But also, yeah, to the point of, like the changes that have happened, yeah, in terms of critical thinking are super concerning. But with that said, I do think it depends. I think we're still early enough that it hasn't been fully decided in terms of like how much of the lived experiences of communities we're flattening. Admittedly, yes, people are using it so much every day to the point of, certain companies even pulling back on giving their employees unlimited usage of these tools. But I do think, at least for us as a sector, we're still kind of at that point where we can make a decision to not flatten these voices, to really surface them and things like that. And I think one of the big things I wanted to point out, I think there was a question from Terrence early on, just kind of an example of small or local data that work really well or has worked really well. Sending the story from rest of world, you can click through to the actual study. But there was a scientist who wanted to use AI to map crop types in Western Kenya. And she found that the available tools simply couldn't recognize what they were looking at. So as they were trained completely on European and American farmland. So already kind of hitting that limit of what Western AI or big tech AI can do for us. So what she did was strap some GoPro cameras. You could see it when you go to the link, the secondary link, sorry, not the rest of the world link. But she essentially strapped some GoPro cameras to the helmets of dozens of volunteers, and they essentially went all around town, walking through actual fields, collecting over 5 million images in 2 weeks. And then they were able to create an actual data set that worked for them, that worked for their purpose, etc. So let's say I think it's still really possible. And I think for us as a community, I think we can be the leaders in that sense, especially from the point of view of like making sure that we're really doing what we say we want to do, really truly helping. But also because I feel like we're very innovative. Sometimes because of the lack of fewer resources, we don't have the huge budgets that big tech has. And I think quite often I sometimes use, for those of you that have watched Apollo 13, the original movie, where they have to make a filter with whatever they have on the spaceship. I feel like that's one of the advantages of this sector. We can get really creative with what we have and do amazing things with what seems to be just a simple small language model or a simple box or whatever it may be. So we have, yeah, we can really lead the way there. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. Tino, your thoughts?
I love the Apollo 13 reference, Kathy. Yeah, I see an analogy to that, and apologies to those who haven't seen the movie. It's about doing the best with what you have, not what you wish for in this moment of crisis. I think the analogy where I see the potential to, because the question May was about, can this help us strengthen decision making and use more inclusion of local voices in the process? And I think, frankly, for us at Kobo, what we see with the ability to record voices and analyze the data reliably at scale, the answer is yes. We've not been able to do that prior to that. Even when many organizations, and Kobo is responsible for about 30 million survey submissions a month that different organizations are collecting. But the technology we had up till a few years ago now allowed you to collect tick box exercises and short text entry. And basically it was not fit for purpose to collecting nuanced voices. If you wanted to do that to qualitative studies, you're going to start your recorder and then you have hours and hours of transcripts to go through that will take months to read, transcribe, and analyze. And so we couldn't really do that at scale. We could hope that some small focus group or a small number of key informants in some way would be representative of a large community, which is always a stretch to assume that in qualitative analysis. And so the fact that we can do that now is thanks to AI. The fact that you can talk to 1,000 people, and we're doing that now for the Ebola response in Eastern DRC, for example. We can talk to 1,000 people. We can ask them open-ended questions, qualitative information, along structured data, and record the voices of what people really truly feel about Ebola rumors, about the ability of the international community, about the local Ministry of Health, local healthcare workers, vaccine hesitancy. We can understand the full nuance of local voices. And without AI, we would not be able to process and analyze it all, so that at the end of the day, within a few hours or days at most, even with human quality control, we know truly in depth what people are thinking, and we can look at the small n, the 2 or 3% who are extremely, let's say, hesitant about some of this, but may be influencing a lot of their neighbors. That's what we need to analyze. And I think when we talk about the lived experiences of communities, it's not what is the average number of what's the average across a whole community. It's what do different subgroups within the community, what do individuals think, and how do we then respond to that? And that's the reality we live in. And going back to Apollo 13, that's the messy reality of doing this kind of work in development and humanitarian response. We cannot just have one size fits all for everyone, and therefore we need the data that is truly fine-grained and niche. And yeah, I think that's the glass half full answer, where AI is really the only way of doing this, because we cannot hire hundreds of analysts to quickly transcribe and analyze 1,000 transcripts in a matter of hours. It's just physically and financially absolutely impossible.
Thanks, Tino. Terence?
Well, I'm kind of intimidated because both Kathy and Tino's responses are so amazing. I don't really have anything I could add to that. I thought Tino is sort of reflecting on some of the things I was thinking about. When I think about the evaluation structure within the UN system right now, and this will get a little philosophical, so I apologize if there's any evaluation people from the UN here, but it's not structured to include the voices of the excluded or the lived experiences. It's structured in very much an accountability for the distributions or the management of money from the. And so it's a system that excludes the voices, even though in terms of references, they always say, and be sure to include marginalized voices. But it's very hard to do it. And the kinds of things that Tino's talking about is a way to actually try to integrate. I was thinking about the metaphor of the Apollo 13. It's the wrong fit. The structure of the evaluation is a wrong fit for this type of thing. But this kinds of tools can actually maybe squeeze a little bit more into it or make do. I like the Apollo 13 metaphor quite a bit. Make do quite into a system that is not designed to do that. And I was thinking, like, I mentioned this to my, about 25 years ago, there was a big work that was produced by the World Bank called Voices of the Poor. Deepa Nadian, I think, was the author. But it was a really extensive qualitative exercise to try to depict the lived experiences of the affected communities that the World Bank was supporting. It was massive work I think it came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, something like that. And I was just thinking how much faster it could be done now with the kinds of tools that Tina was describing in Kobo. And it would be really interesting to try to replicate that again. And it could probably be done at a even bigger scale than what was possible at that time, 25 years ago. So anyway, I'm just saying Tino and Kathy's the answers were so much better than mine, but they were great.
Okay. Thanks so much for those insights. And I see a lot of comments in the chat as well. Very interesting discussion over there. Now we go into our Q&A. I haven't seen a lot of questions in the chat. So if you have any questions for our speakers, now is the time to put that in the chat so we can respond to them. So I do have one interesting question here. It says, do we need AI in everything? No, but AI is so intrusive. It is inserting itself in everything we do. Who can be the police that limits this intrusiveness? Any thoughts from our speakers?
I can try. I've been looking at that question since I posted it. I mean, I think in terms of not just like the AI inside the tools, but just generally the use of AI, I've been a part of many conversations that I don't know if we necessarily have found a solution to, but examples of things that have been said are disclosure of the use of AI in creating reports and synthesizing things. Like if you're going to turn into a report to your funder saying, I used AI for this or for these specific things to synthesize the data, et cetera. Others who are a bit more intense about how they feel, they might say, they have said, let's shame everyone who is putting AI into places that we shouldn't be putting AI. But the discussions have also centered around both cases, both disclosure and obviously shame might make people do things more secretly and hide their uses of AI. So not necessarily like a great thing. But I think in terms of tools and how they're essentially trying to put AI into everything, I just turn it off. I won't be a willing user of the thing. I use quite a few tools. Notion, for example, is one. Definitely turn that off. Same with Gmail. I don't want you reading through my emails. Things like that. In the hopes that if there's not enough users, they'll eventually, hopefully, will take away the feature. Likely not going to happen with Google, but in other places, they might see that it's not a place that they should invest into. Not a super clear answer though, but
Self-policing at least, checking to see what AI really goes into the things that you do. Any thoughts from our two speakers on this?
Well, I'll go next because Tino definitely has better answers than I do, so you can go last. But I was thinking of it more in the direction of what somebody brought up earlier about the land use for data settlements, the water, the power, where the power sources are coming from, where AI gets included in the different technology tools like Google or I'm actually quite impressed with my children who refuse to read the AI summary, and they'll get on me and my wife if they say, okay, where did you get that? Did you get from the summary or did you go to an actual link, right? So they're pushing back on some of that critical thinking question, but they may be a minority now. But I was thinking for some of those other things, right now we're in an environment where this AI is a technology that's completely unregulated to some extent in terms of land use planning, taxes. You can put sort of past policies or laws around where technology companies choose to use AI. We haven't done that yet. So there's quite a bit, I think, that can be done on some of that policy work in terms of those kinds of AI decisions. Not necessarily do I use AI to write my report, but those places in the background. And I think that might actually be worth looking at, because unless we work on those things in that unregulated sort of cowboy environment out there right now, we're not likely to change anything around the ethical use of AI inside the system. And so that was kind of where my thoughts were going when that question was posed. It's a lot easier said than done. It's really hard to do, actually, but it seems like that might be the point where I'm thinking like it might be interesting to engage further, is sort of some of that background thing on those places. Okay, Tino, now for
And Tino, before you go, there's also another question that you might want to answer. So it says, now that Kobo can now capture and analyze voice data, how do you account for language differences? Can Kobo collect and analyze voice data in Creole or Creole, for instance? So we can maybe respond to that as well.
That's much easier. The answer is
But you can
the
also
short.
answer the first question.
I'll see if I ignore this. The first one is hard. The short answer is no. Creole is not supported, and that's a shame. And that's sort of why I mentioned this earlier as an example. Is that why is Haitian Creole not included, whereas tiny European languages are, and we know why, because of the training data and the costs of it all. But that's what we're trying to counter with creating these new speech recognition models. And frankly, yes, we can also push commercial companies to do their part to close this gap, instead of just thinking about the language as not commercially viable and therefore not worth. And it's not just speech recognition for Kobo's, survey purposes. Going back to policing, it's not just what is bad we should stop, and there's plenty of good examples Terrence just gave, but also where do we incentivize or perhaps use regulation to say speech recognition models or language models in general need to be able to capture certain languages at an adequate level. And maybe that's by number of speakers. We're so far from that. AI regulation is almost non-existent. But I think we need to incentivize, and governments and governing bodies need to show what the minimum requirements are for these models, so that they can be used safely, or at least can be certified for safe use in different domains. I think one piece that comes to mind on the policing is, and I think this goes back to Terrence's example of young people, and I have two kids too, is it's policing is hard for any technology, and it usually backfires. People want to use the thing because it's illegal, right? Think about smoking. But what we need to do is educate people. It's not just children, although yes, children need to be educated. They're very fast at learning these tools. We've seen in our own work with students, university students, that you think they're very AI savvy, but they are not. Just because people use something every single day, and we've done this with Harvard students, I'm sad to say, does not mean that they are any more savvy than the average person. They're able to use the tools. Perhaps there's savviness in, let me quickly summarize something, but they're not smart about it necessarily to know where these tools are wrong, where they're hallucinating. They might be really, really inefficient with their prompting to get extremely biased results. So the education of our workforce, of our children, is really essential, because people use these tools because they produce something that looks good. And every time something looks good, people are tempted to use it, even if they know it's not always correct. It just looks so good, why not use it? And that gap between its capabilities and what people think its capabilities are is immense, and it creates lots of risks, including for local communities, because the data analysis might be wrong. The data might be incorrect to actually inform new programs. If we think about evaluation, if the evaluation was done with AI incorrectly or in a really bad way, it leads us to think that a program that was bad is actually good, and so we're replicating it now, or vice versa. We're shutting down a program that was actually good. So the gap between the capabilities of this tool and what people think it's good for is large, and unless we start educating really seriously within organizations, within schools, universities, and so on, people are using this more and more and more, and I think we're going to wake up to more and more headlines of how this was used the wrong way and what the long-term results were.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, I think that's a really difficult question. And I guess, yeah, if we started ourselves, look at how we're using AI and what AI tools are we using, but also educating people on the ethical use of AI. I think that's probably where we can start. We have a couple more very interesting questions in the chat, but maybe we can take one as we're pressed with time. You can also respond in the chat to the questions, Terrence and Kathy, if you have time. But there's this one interesting question or comment about women being more skeptical and less likely to use or adopt AI because of their social experiences. Has anyone ever encountered this a finding? Would this have any implications in the evaluation space, I guess, or in the aid and development space? Is it something that anyone of you can comment on?
Yeah, happy
Kathy.
to, unless, or that Tina was adjusting to speak, but also you can go first. Yeah, I think I will say maybe, and the thing is too that I kind of failed to add before, just even the concept of small local models has changed significantly in the last year. What they could do a year ago is not what they can do now. And so, it's definitely a sector that you have to be watching every month because things change. With that said, I think that even just a year ago, yes, maybe the trend was that women were a little bit more skeptical of it, et cetera. But I do think personally, obviously I didn't do a survey or anything like that, but it's just a gut feeling that everyone is just generally more skeptical of it now. And I do think it came from just kind of all the job losses and how it's being advertised and how it's affecting people in their day-to-day. And so while before it used to be a lot of my women friends were like, I don't know, using their critical thinking skills, to go back to Tina, and other groups are probably a little bit more comfortable with it. I've seen more of a spread nowadays because it's just affecting everyone. But just specifically to answer Sarah's question, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think there was somewhere else in the chat that maybe the future is we all lose our ability to think and process. There was a recent study that came out this morning or was shared with me this morning that I haven't fully read. But yeah, just talked about people who use AI for writing versus someone who's using their brain only, and just like the differences in brain activity for each of the groups. I think it was 3 groups: brain only, search only, and AI. And just the actual biological things that could be seen are really scary. So it's actually, I think in my opinion, it's okay to be a little skeptical of things that are just heavily subsidized by venture capitalism and all these things. Also, as a New Yorker, it's okay to be skeptical. Can't trust everything that's handed to us. So there's that.
Anyone else would like to comment on that?
Well, I was just thinking, I was trying to go through my, obviously I don't have a study on this, but just like the impressions I have from my coworkers and so forth. And I don't really see a gender differentiation or gender divide in terms of like who uses it or who's skeptical. I mean, I do think that there might be more skepticism or at least caution now than there was when it first came out. But I think I haven't seen that. It's interesting. It would be interesting to think about this more deliberately when we're doing a next evaluation. But so far, I haven't seen that as a gender built thing. But as Kathy said, I think good skepticism is a good thing, no matter where it's coming from.
Well, quickly, I feel like the framing was that that's a bad thing. I think we're all saying the same thing. So this is actually a really good survey finding for women, because you should be damn skeptical of AI. And if you're among the population that is more skeptical, simply because of your gender, you have a leg up in this fight against disinformation and hallucinations. I think that's actually a really good survey finding, rather than framing it like we need to get women to trust AI more. I think it's the other way around, and men are behind and are trusting a tool that they shouldn't trust blindly way too much. And I think maybe we see the effects on election data and social media trends beyond just AI, but like I think technology has a lot of harms alongside with a lot of benefits, and being skeptical is a really good defense against that.
Yeah, I was
Right.
thinking about
So
it's
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, I was
No,
thinking about I was following on Tino's thing around skepticism for misinformation. If you clump the potential of AI to generate misinformation, who is or what types of populations are less likely to be susceptible to it? I think there are studies on that around age and gender and class, some other things that for mechanisms on that. But anyway, sorry, I thought that was interesting. Good. Sorry, I'll stay quiet now, man. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Terence. And thanks everyone for your questions and comments in the chat. And yeah, we had a very, very interesting discussion, but I have now to hand over to Nadini Prasad, one of the board of directors of the CEI, for closing remarks. Nadini, over to you.
Okay, thank you, May. So it was a very interesting discussion. Wondering who one of those have not used any of the tools persons were when you did your poll. That was one of the persons was indeed me. So I'm still grappling with AI because I'm in an academic environment, and it is very challenging for me to teach my students critical thinking and analytical skills when AI is so prominent and invading in every aspect of your lives. So it is a challenging issue for me. I recognize that it has its benefits in some areas, but I'm still really torn up between looking, because I'm very much into the SDGs, and I'm very much torn up about the implications of what it is going to do to jobs and water, etc., as was posed in your first question. As we make progress in one area, what is it doing in another area? So those are issues that, I'm still fighting with. I recognize it's here to stay, but I'm grappling with how are we going to cope with these issues as we try to, embrace the future of what is to come. And then I saw a really interesting comment in the chat about, when the system shuts down, what happens from back to the Stone Age days. And honestly, that can happen in reality. The system can shut down and we can really be back to the Stone Age days, where people have become so used to AI and its reliance that we have lost all the ability to think for ourselves or do anything on our own. So it's a challenging topic. One of my colleagues told me recently that, when the advent of technology first came out and computers, etc., people were very resilient. They said, we're going to lose all these jobs, etc. It's a kind of similar principle, but it's a more serious principle, I think. So it is something that we really have to, while we have little choice than to embrace it, we do have to be skeptical and think about it carefully and how we're actually using it, and how we are still going to get younger persons, because we were exposed to learning at a time where AI was not the mode of learning. So for us, we will understand how to use it in an ethical way for the most part. But for the new generation who is coming up, we have to be very careful in how we actually teach them to use AI and still help them to develop those critical thinking skills. Because I think at the end of the day, if the system shuts down, which is a very realistic probability, that we will be in some serious trouble if we don't have any skill sets of our own to resort to. So I know that our time is coming to an end, but I would like to thank the distinguished panel for sharing. And it is a really interesting conversation. As I said, I am not against it, but I'm skeptical about its use because of the other issues that it is infringing with. So wish to thank the panel and May for being a really great moderator. And that's all I have to say on the topic right now. I really have to think a lot more about this topic as I come to these presentations and learn a little more each time. And I just saw the report that came out about, the implications of AI on the environment, etc. So I'm going to be delving into that report with great interest to see what exactly is said in that report, because I'm sure it will sum up some of my feelings of what's happening with AI. But as I said, AI is here. The constant thing that I hear every day is AI is here to stay. We have no choice than to embrace it. But it doesn't mean that as a educator, I am not concerned about it. So I'm just going to leave the audience with those words as we embrace something new. We also have to think about the implications of what we are embracing. And we know that the persons who promote these technologies, for the most part, are going to make big profits off of it. But it may come at the expense of many, many hundreds of thousands of people. And it is something that we can't really predict at this point, but for sure there's going to be some fallout from the use of AI and the ethical use of AI. As with everything else, there may be also lawsuits in the future, when people use information that they have picked up without actually seeing, fact checking to see that it is authentic and they go and report it, etc. And I myself have been following more closely some documentaries on AI, and I know the facts are incorrect in it. And that's why I'm concerned as an educator, because I know the correct facts. I know when I see those documentaries that the facts are incorrect. But for someone who's a novice and has never known anything on the topic, they're going to believe it's gospel. And so we have this problem where people will actually learn some incorrect things and believe that it is actually authentic because that's what is out there and that's what they're listening to. So it's a very, very challenging topic. But I would like to thank our distinguished panel and moderator for a very interesting session. And I look forward to more conversations on this topic. And hopefully you can, I'll become more and more convinced and less skeptical as I learn more, because, one of the reasons people are skeptical is because they don't know a whole heap about a particular topic. So hopefully, I hope that my views change in the future, but there's many, many questions. I have too many to even pose in this chat. So I'm just going to leave it at that. So have a great day, everyone. And I was happy to be a part of the panel. And I'll hand over back to May for final closing comments.
Thank you so much, Nadine. I guess the last point would be, as evaluators, let's continue to be critical in in using AI in our work. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks to our speakers for sharing your thoughts and insights on your work. So we still have another session tomorrow, so please do register and join us again for another interesting discussion on AI used in the Caribbean Development Policy. So that's tomorrow at 9 a.m. Jamaica time. And then lastly, please do continue to stay in touch. You can sign up for ALNAP's M&E bulletin. The link is in the chat, so you can receive the latest news about our work, including an upcoming Explain briefing on M&E and AI in humanitarian context that will be coming out in the next month or so. And then we also want to hear your thoughts about this session. We invite you to take a moment to answer the post-event survey. We have the link in the chat. And the survey might also hopefully automatically pop out from Zoom when you leave the room. And that's it, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today and have a good rest of your day.